The deadliest meals ever served behind bars. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. The tray that sparked a riot. The first photograph came out of South Carolina's Lee Correctional Institution, a maximum security prison known for its violence and overcrowding. It showed a beige plastic tray streaked with gray residue, a lump of what looked like oatmeal congealed beside a half slice of bread. But it wasn't the food itself that caught attention, it was what crawled inside it. According to a 2018 investigative report by the Post and Courier, inmates had complained for months that their meals were infested with maggots, and that the kitchen smelled of bleach and rot. Prison officials dismissed it as rumor until a guard anonymously leaked photographs online. Within hours, they went viral. The photo became Exhibit A in a class action lawsuit that alleged systemic neglect and food contamination. According to court filings, inmates claimed that kitchen contractors were paid to meet minimum calorie counts but cut corners to save money, serving spoiled meat, moldy vegetables, and water so dirty it left a film on plastic cups. For years, the kitchen had been run by Trinity Services Group, one of the largest private prison food contractors in the U.S. Public records later revealed that the company had faced similar lawsuits in Michigan, Arizona, and Florida, each accusing it of serving unsafe meals that led to foodborne illness. Inside Lee Correctional, the food wasn't just a source of discomfort, it became a weapon. When the trays arrived cold and crawling, inmates began to refuse them. That refusal turned into protests, and those protests eventually became riots. On April 15, 2018, the prison erupted in what became the deadliest U.S. prison riot in 25 years, 7 inmates killed, over 20 injured. While the immediate cause was gang conflict, internal reviews later noted how months of rotting food, lack of medical care, and hunger had pushed tensions past breaking point. One former inmate, identified in filings only as a JT, described it bluntly. "You're already locked in a box. Then they feed you like animals. You start feeling less human every day. And when you stop feeling human, anything can happen." In the aftermath, investigators found broken coolers, expired meat dated months past use, and a roach infestation so bad that maintenance logs marked it as beyond control. Even guards admitted off record that they avoided the kitchen. When reporters asked state officials about accountability, they pointed to the contractor. When the company was asked, it blamed the Department of Corrections for lack of funding. In the middle stood the inmates, starved, angry, and voiceless. A 2020 Human Rights Watch summary described the prison meals as evidence of a system stretched past morality. They weren't exaggerating. Across the U.S., similar photographs were surfacing, trays stained yellow with grease, bread with black mold, and soups that smelled of chemicals. One image from Michigan's Penal Correctional Facility showed what appeared to be rice mixed with cockroaches. According to state documents, the discovery led to 30 inmates hospitalized with Salmonella and E. coli infections. A subsequent audit found that the prison's dishwashing system hadn't worked for over a year, and staff were instructed to rinse trays manually. The lawsuit that followed, Martin et al. V. Michigan Department of Corrections, revealed something darker. Emails obtained through Freedom of Information requests showed senior officials discussing budget priorities, acknowledging the contamination but deciding not to replace the contractor because of state cost commitments. In the words of one whistleblower chef, whose identity remains sealed, "We threw out more food than we served. But the stuff we served was already bad. They told us, just make it look cooked." For inmates like JT, the consequences were lifelong. Years after his release, he still carried scars from a severe intestinal infection that nearly killed him. He said the medical report listed foodborne contamination as the cause. His lawsuit was dismissed under a technicality, the state's sovereign immunity clause. But his photo, the one with the maggots, became something else. It spread across forums, then reached advocacy groups, and finally landed in the inbox of an investigative journalist from Reuters, who began tracing the issue across multiple states. Her research uncovered over 170 lawsuits filed between 2009 and 2020 related to prison food quality, many dismissed, some settled quietly. And in nearly all of them, the same contractors appeared again and again. As the investigation deepened, one pattern became clear. The cheaper the food contract, the higher the complaints, and the worse the meals. In a federal report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office, inspectors concluded that food quality directly affects inmate behavior, safety, and institutional stability. It wasn't just about hunger. It was about dignity. When meals become punishment, the line between discipline and cruelty blurs beyond recognition. Across the Atlantic, in Russia's IK-6 penal colony, where opposition figures were reportedly held, photographs leaked to independent outlets showed something disturbingly similar: soup with worms, black bread, and tea brewed from boiled tap water. Human rights monitors described the rations as barely edible and designed to weaken, not nourish. Meanwhile, in Venezuela's Tocaron prison, food shortages forced inmates to rely on family members bringing supplies. When those visits were restricted during the pandemic, reports by El Nacional described entire cell blocks surviving on rice water and scraps. Smuggling became survival. Corruption turned into currency. Those who controlled food distribution controlled power itself. One former Venezuelan inmate told reporters after his release, "We traded food for protection. If you had rice, you lived. If not, you starved." By 2021, a growing number of international watchdogs began linking malnutrition in prisons to rising death rates. The World Prison Brief estimated that in certain Latin American facilities, 1 in 10 inmates suffered from chronic undernourishment. But in the US, the outrage was quieter, muffled by bureaucracy, sealed reports, and court dismissals. The photographs remained pixelated, haunting, undeniable. They told a truth that official statements avoided. That behind the walls of civilization's most secure institutions, even a meal could become a form of punishment. And sometimes, as Chapter 2 will reveal, those meals became deadly, not just through neglect, but by design. When the meal becomes a weapon. At Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola, a place already infamous for its brutal working fields, food wasn't just nourishment, it was leverage. Court documents from Wilkerson versus Stalder revealed that between 1998 and 2007, dozens of inmates complained that guards used spoiled meals as a form of control. Those who refused to work the fields under sweltering heat, often 12 hours a day, were allegedly served what inmates called the punishment plate. It was a mixture of leftovers scraped from other trays, mashed into a paste, then reheated. The official term was nutraloaf, a so-called disciplinary meal, used in several U.S. states, a gray, dense block made from pureed vegetables, bread, beans, and whatever else was available. According to a 2014 Associated Press report, nutraloaf had been banned in several states after health experts called it culinary degradation. Yet in others, it remained on the menu. In one sworn deposition, an Angola inmate described it this way: "It tasted like vomit and sand. You eat it or you go hungry. Either way, you lose." The logic behind nutraloaf, as correctional officers claimed, was deterrence. If the regular meals were too easy to refuse, this one made you think twice before acting out. But advocates argued it crossed the line from discipline into cruel and unusual punishment, violating the Eighth Amendment. Across the Atlantic, similar tactics appeared in Russia's penal colonies, where prisoners who disobeyed orders were fed thin porridge laced with excessive salt. Human rights monitors from Memorial Human Rights Center documented testimonies describing how the meals were designed to induce thirst and exhaustion, forcing inmates to rely on guards for clean water, a deliberate method of subjugation. One report from IK-2 in Mordovia stated that disciplinary feeding methods were used to create dependence. When a journalist asked a former warden about the allegations, he responded coldly, "Hunger is the best teacher. It makes men obedient." That sentence appeared again, nearly word for word, in a 1970 Soviet training manual for prison wardens, archived decades later. The idea wasn't new, it was inherited. In Venezuela's Taquito prison, where the state often lost control to inmate gangs known as prans, the opposite problem emerged: prisoners used food scarcity to control guards. When rations arrived, gang leaders decided who ate. In exchange for compliance, they provided protection. Those who resisted, starved. An ex-guard who fled the facility told BBC Mundo that food trucks were ransomed before they entered. The gangs made lists. The government didn't control the food, the gangs did. We had to negotiate to eat too. Back in the U.S., perhaps the most chilling account came from Alabama's Holman Correctional Facility, where a 2016 internal investigation exposed a series of intentional contaminations. According to reports from AL.com and federal filings, several inmates claimed their food had been tainted with cleaning chemicals after they filed grievances. Samples were never tested, officials dismissed it as unsubstantiated. But photographs of trays with a blue-tinted residue circulated through advocacy groups and reached the media months later. The allegations coincided with a federal civil rights probe into Alabama's prison system, which the Department of Justice later described as unconstitutional due to unsafe, unsanitary, and inhumane conditions. Among the findings: rodent and insect infestation in kitchens, broken refrigeration units, inmates reporting nausea and vomiting linked to meals. But the most disturbing detail came from interviews with kitchen staff themselves. One former worker admitted that industrial cleaning agents were sometimes used to mask the smell of rot. When asked by investigators why, she said, "The supervisor said it was better than inmates complaining about the smell." No criminal charges were filed. In Texas, the weaponization of food took another form: deprivation. In 2017, the Texas Civil Rights Project filed a complaint on behalf of inmates kept in solitary confinement, alleging they were routinely served fewer than 1,200 calories a day. The supposed cost-saving policy led to rapid weight loss, dizziness, and fainting. Medical logs confirmed several cases of severe malnutrition. A federal judge reviewing the complaint noted, "Starvation cannot be justified as budget management." Despite the statement, the case was dismissed for lack of standing. The plaintiffs had already been released. The policy quietly continued until public pressure forced the Department of Criminal Justice to revise its guidelines. Meanwhile, a 2019 Reuters investigation found that across 30 states, at least 45 inmates had died between 2001 and 2018 where malnutrition or dehydration was listed as a contributing cause. In most cases, the deaths occurred in solitary confinement units where monitoring was minimal. These deaths weren't all deliberate, but they reflected a system where food had become both a control mechanism and a mirror of neglect. In prisons where every calorie is counted, even a skipped meal could mean punishment or silence. And sometimes, the meal itself told the story of what authorities wanted hidden. When investigators visited Florida's Lowell Correctional Institution for Women, they found that the cafeteria ceiling leaked brown water directly onto serving lines. Inmates told Miami Herald reporters that they often ate while dodging drips from above. Inspectors logged violations but noted no immediate danger. Weeks later, one inmate died from a severe gastrointestinal infection. The official cause was complications of pre-existing conditions. Unconfirmed sources within the prison said she had complained about her meals the night before. Her death was never linked to food contamination in official reports. Inmates across multiple states began to refer to these conditions as the silent sentence, punishment beyond the official one. They served their time, but the system served them something else entirely. One retired corrections officer, speaking anonymously to ProPublica, summarized it grimly. "You control three things in prison: light, time, and food. Take one away, and they get restless. Take all three, and they break." By 2022, several advocacy groups were calling for independent oversight of prison kitchens, arguing that food quality was not a luxury but a right. In Congress, a small bipartisan committee introduced the Prison Nutrition Reform Act, citing data from over a decade of federal complaints. The bill stalled before reaching a vote. But the movement had already begun online, in viral photos, inmate testimonies, and whistleblower accounts that refused to fade. Each tray, each stain, each photograph was more than evidence, it was a message. That inside the walls of the world's strongest institutions, the smallest thing, a meal, could still become a weapon of power, control, and silence. The Hunger Rebellion. It began with a single tray flipped over in silence. In 2019, inside California's Corcoran State Prison, an inmate identified in filings only as RM refused his meal. He had done so quietly for 6 days, no shouting, no demands. Just a refusal. When guards asked why, he wrote on a scrap of paper, "You can't feed people poison and call it punishment." At first, they ignored him. Then others followed. Within a week, nearly 200 inmates across 3 facilities joined what became known as the Hunger Rebellion, a coordinated protest against prison food conditions that had stretched from California to Florida, Ohio, and Texas. It wasn't spontaneous. It was deliberate, organized through coded messages, legal mail, and whispers in the exercise yards. According to court filings and prison ombudsman reports, inmates demanded 4 things. Independent inspections of all prison kitchens. Immediate termination of contracts with repeat violation food vendors. Access to clean water and sanitary utensils. Medical treatment for those affected by food contamination. The response was swift and brutal. Many of the organizers were transferred to administrative segregation, also known as the hole. In Texas, according to a 2020 Houston Chronicle report, inmates at the Polunsky unit were allegedly denied visitation rights and phone calls for weeks as retaliation. Prison officials dismissed it as routine security procedure. But word spread, through smuggled letters, advocacy hotlines, and, most notably, whistleblower guards who began leaking photographs to reporters. Those images appeared first on Twitter, trays of food blackened by mold, vegetables so decomposed they looked liquefied, and portions so small they wouldn't sustain a child. Within days, hashtags like #PrisonFoodCrisis and #nutraloaf trended across social media. For the first time in decades, the public could see what incarceration looked like beyond bars, in every crumb and stain that defined survival. Inside the investigations. In response to growing outrage, several states launched investigations. The U.S. Department of Justice opened a preliminary review into conditions in Alabama, Texas, and Michigan. Their findings, released under the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act, CRIPA, described a systemic disregard for the health and safety of inmates through persistent food contamination, malnutrition, and denial of medical care. In Michigan, auditors discovered that internal complaints about contaminated food had been deleted from digital logs before review. When investigators cross-referenced them with medical records, they found a clear pattern: spikes in foodborne illness reports matched periods of known equipment failure in prison kitchens. A senior corrections officer, whose testimony was later anonymized in congressional hearings, stated, "They called it damage control. We called it what it was, cover-up." At Florida's Everglades Correctional Institution, a separate report revealed that prison management had falsified temperature logs for months. Meals listed as safe were being served at 50 degrees Fahrenheit below regulation, allowing bacteria to thrive. By late 2020, at least 17 states faced ongoing litigation over prison food safety. Settlements began to emerge quietly, undisclosed amounts, no admission of guilt, and non-disclosure clauses that silenced plaintiffs once again. But the hunger strikes hadn't gone unnoticed. Outside the walls, activists and journalists turned the rebellion into a movement. The whistleblower and the tape. One of the turning points came from Illinois, where a kitchen supervisor known publicly only as Witness 43 leaked audio recordings to The Guardian. In the tape, a regional contractor manager could be heard instructing staff to use the bleach solution if meat smelled off, telling them it was better than a lawsuit. The leak went viral. The manager was suspended. And for the first time, prison food quality became national news. Lawmakers demanded hearings. Documentaries aired across Netflix, PBS, and YouTube exposing the industry behind correctional catering, billion-dollar corporations built on minimum bids and maximum neglect. In a Senate subcommittee hearing, one senator compared the system to a state-sanctioned starvation economy. The phrase stuck. When hunger meets power. In Venezuela, similar protests were spreading. At El Rodeo II prison, inmates reportedly refused to eat for 10 days, demanding access to medical care and clean food. According to Reuters and El Universal, at least 3 prisoners died during the strike, 2 from dehydration, 1 from infection. Officials denied the deaths were related to the protest, but families of the deceased were barred from autopsy access. In Russia, hunger strikes became a language of resistance. Political detainees in IK-6 and IK-2 documented their conditions in letters smuggled to independent media outlets. Their descriptions were chillingly similar to those from the U.S. South. They feed us to remind us what we are, property, not people. International observers from Amnesty International later concluded that denial of adequate food was systematically used as coercion. Meanwhile, in the U.S., some of the most damning evidence didn't come from inmates at all, but from internal emails between state procurement officials and contractors, obtained by Freedom of Information Act requests. The emails discussed controlling costs by reducing meal variety and royalizing surplus ingredients. One message, dated February 2019, read, "We can stretch the protein budget by mixing old stock with fresh. Label accordingly." The old stock in question was expired chicken, condemned by inspectors months earlier. The turning point. By mid-2021, a coalition of journalists, civil rights lawyers, and former inmates launched a national campaign titled Feed Them Right. Their goal was simple: transparency. They pushed for public audits, nutritional oversight, and the abolition of disciplinary meals like nutraloaf. The campaign gained traction after a viral documentary clip showed side-by-side photos. One of a standard inmate tray, the other of a meal at a juvenile facility in Sweden. The difference was night and day. One looked like punishment. The other looked like reform. Within weeks, the hashtag #FeedThemRight tag reached over 20 million views. Celebrities, former prosecutors, and even ex-wardens voiced support. The conversation had shifted, not about leniency, but humanity. As one advocate said on a televised interview, "You can't rehabilitate a person you're slowly starving." The cost of speaking out. Not everyone who joined the movement survived it. In 2022, a former inmate named Daniel Parker, who had filed multiple grievances about prison food safety in Alabama, was found dead in his halfway house. Authorities ruled it suicide. Advocates called it suspicious. His name later appeared in congressional records as one of several deceased complainants in the Federal Prison Food Safety Review. To those who knew him, he was the first person to publicly use the term "deadliest meals," describing the system not as broken, but as intentionally blind. A system exposed. By 2023, the dominoes began to fall. Trinity Services Group, the company named in dozens of lawsuits, lost several major state contracts after federal audits confirmed repeated violations. 2 senior executives resigned under pressure. The Department of Justice began drafting national guidelines for nutritional and sanitary compliance in correctional facilities. But reform came slow. Even as lawsuits settled and policy drafts circulated, countless inmates continued to receive the same gray trays, reheated in the same roach-filled kitchens. The system was changing, but too late for those it had already poisoned. The legacy of the rebellion. The hunger strikes eventually ended, but not the message they left behind. Across prisons, graffiti began appearing on cell walls and yard fences, short phrases scratched into paint or concrete. Feed us right. Food is freedom. No more silent sentence. They weren't just slogans. They were memorials to those who died of infection, starvation, or silence. And outside the walls, journalists kept digging. Each report uncovered new evidence, altered invoices, falsified nutritional charts, and contracts written to ensure profit over survival. The truth was no longer confined. It was out, visible in photos, videos, and testimonies from both sides of the bars. As one former inmate put it in a 2024 interview, "We didn't riot because we were violent. We rioted because we were hungry, and no one cared." In the end, it wasn't a weapon, or a riot, or even a scandal that defined the story of prison meals. It was something smaller, the moment a tray was turned upside down, and for the first time, the world looked. Disclaimer. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. Sources: Reuters, 2020-2023. The Guardian, 2021. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division Reports, 2020-2022. Amnesty International, 2021. Houston Chronicle, 2020. Freedom of Information Act Releases, 2019-2022. BBC Mundo and El Universal, 2021.